tell you what.
Oh man. All right. So, episode 95.
Welcome.
Yeah,
That was awkward as shit.
that was, but
All
I'm
right.
okay.
Welcome everyone to episode 94.
95. Jesus.
I know. This is bad.
You did in last week on 94,
All
you
right,
said
well,
95.
Patreon gets a treat this week, you know.
They do. They do.
They get to see us flopping all over the place.
All right, everyone. Welcome to episode 95 of the Retic Lounge. I am Lucas, joined by Nathan, your co-host. And tonight we have, or today, whenever you're listening to this, we are going to be talking about line breeding, or AKA inbreeding in the retic industry. And we are going to have Riley joining us, who was on before to talk about Morelia, to talk about carpet pythons. And I figured I would try to get... we wanted to get like an ambassador for another, what's it called? Reptile community species out there that, you know, has a good representation of what line breeding looks like. And, Riley's just that guy who is easy to contact. He's, you know, a boy, like he's just like one of the guys. And I figured why not have him back on? Because he's smart as hell. He's got a lot of experience. I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. I couldn't think of anyone better to have on. What do you think, Nathan?
No, I agree. Just before we pull him in, I just want to remind everyone, do the usual, like, comment, subscribe. If you're not already, join our Patreon. We have a cool Discord going on over there with just a bunch of people lifting each other up, trying to just help everyone in their retic journey. So join over there. Make sure you're following the Reptile Lounge Network. Make sure you're following the Chondro Lounge. And I think I've hit everything.
That's true. I mean, you mentioned the network and the Chondro Lounge, and that wasn't even on the forefront or the back of my mind. So you said that and I was like, oh shit, like there's more episodes.
Yeah, this isn't just the Retic Lounge anymore, Lucas.
Yeah, dude. Okay. I forgot about that. Anyways, let's you want to well wait, before we jump in, Nathan, I kind of just want to highlight I guess where I'm coming from with this episode, and then if you have like questions, we have very limited like locality gene pool in the US, right? And when I first came in, I was
even beyond locality, I'm limited with the stuff I want to work with to truly stay small.
Right, exactly. And that's actually a very good point. The idea of like, you know, animals staying small and wanting to continue to go down that route of making smaller animals. Because anytime that you introduce, you know, animals from outside of what you're working with, you introduce the potential for larger genetic pool. But yeah, for me, it's more along the lines of like, I came in with this idea that if you take, if you take locality animals and you don't have an unrelated locality animal that's the same locality to the animal you have, then you're doing this like sin, this like unwritten rule that you need to try to outcross as much as possible. And now that I'm just open to how limited the pool is, I'm now asking the questions, why? Why are we saying these things? Like, yeah, surely it makes sense. You know, you don't want to, you know, have I was going to go really dark there with like family inbreeding in humans. Just going to say, you don't want to go
we've
there.
Already talked about the wonderful whites of West Virginia.
Exactly. You don't want to go there. Right. But surely, you know, there are people out there that are so adamant in the retic world. And when I ask them why, they can't answer, but they're so adamant that they're like, well, if the locality just goes extinct to captivity, it goes extinct. You can't line or inbreed. And I'm like, okay, see, that seems a little extreme.
See, that's kind of funny to me, just because when I got my first pair of ball pythons, this was 11 years ago. I was on the local reptile Facebook forums, and, trying to get information on breeding and what I wanted to get, and gathering information on morphs, doing all the usual. Someone reached out to me and was like, "You want help with breeding?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like asking me a handful of questions about what I thought was like okay and not with breeding. And one of their questions was, "Is inbreeding okay with your ball pythons?" And I was like, "No, it can't be." They're like, "No, it's totally fine. You're gonna be okay if you inbreed your ball python."
Kick that sounds like a Facebook group question. And then they kick you out for not answering it right.
Someone that
those
reached out
assholes.
to me. Yeah. So it's just funny how we got different pieces of advice coming in.
Right. And I don't know, like, we'll get into it more when we get Riley on. So do you have anything you want to add, or is there anything you're trying to gain, information that you're wanting to gain from this?
No, I mean, when we talk about like line breeding, inbreeding, we've already done an episode on it, so I think we're going to hit some of the same points, and I want to hear Riley's perspective on it. So let's welcome him in.
Yeah, if Daddy Jimison says I can line breed, I'm going to line breed. Whether you've poured your heart and soul into your reptile business or you've just begun your business journey, AE Foundry has you covered with next level expertise in graphic design, motion graphics, videography, photography, and so much more. If you've been dying for a new logo for your reptile business, motion graphics for your current logo, a new website, or need assistance making your video podcast come to life, then listen carefully. AE Foundry's mission places storytelling at its core. AE Foundry believes that a distinctive story and background are the driving forces that set your brand apart. In today's market, consumers seek more than just products. They crave a connection built on trust with the brands they cherish. AE Foundry is committed to empowering small businesses and fostering authenticity that resonates with their consumers. Reach out to them and let them help you craft a visual narrative that helps establish a genuine and lasting connection with your audience. To contact AE Foundry, email them at aromero@aefoundry.com or on Instagram at AE Foundry. When it comes to housing your retics, trust me, you're going to want an enclosure that will be just as strong and durable as your reticulated python. The Heartland Reptile enclosure is next level tough and will outlive you and your retic by several generations. Heartland Reptile enclosures are designed and manufactured out of powder-coated aluminum to provide the highest quality and longevity available in the reptile enclosure. What makes them even better is they are lighter than your PVC and plastic enclosures out there and are extremely tough. Stop playing around with plastic enclosures for your large constrictors and step up your enclosure game with the Heartland Reptile enclosure. To inquire about one of these enclosures, speak to Jordan himself at Heartland Reptiles on Instagram, Facebook, and on TikTok. Here on TRL, we preach about the importance of using hooks, feeding tongs, and other tools with your reticulated python all the time. Animal Equipment by Stoney not only has all the tools you need for any snake you keep, but they have the absolute best hooks on the market. What sets Animal Equipment by Stoney's hooks apart from the other guys is their polycarbonate hook ends that provide a warm feel that won't disturb or bother your retic, ensuring a positive interaction from the get-go. Since 2008, AE Stoney has been supplying zoos, herpetologists, and other animal professionals with their tools. It's time for you to step your hook game up and buy an AE Stoney hook. To learn more and purchase one of their amazing products, visit aestoney.com.
Well, watch out, Riley. He's calling you daddy.
What's going on, man?
Hey, as long as we don't cross any like P. Diddy lines, we're good.
No Diddy.
No Diddy, all daddy, we're good.
I think we're past the 5-minute mark on YouTube, so we can make our $2 from this episode.
Cool. Good. I want you guys to make your money on this. I love you guys' show. You guys are one of the very few actual reptile content, regardless of platform and media, that I actually stay up on and subscribe on and listen to and a part of the Discord and love your train of thought. Man. Yeah, I love that. I'm always lurking in there and reading, and you guys aren't kidding. It is literally an uplifting community that is all about support and fostering knowledge and helping one another. And I think it's fantastic. It's a great example to set, and I try and do the same in my own little shindig too. So before we get going, I just wanted to tip my cap to you guys.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you, man. That means a lot. And I know that, I mean, it's great to have you there. You know, I know that there's a lot of diehard retic people on our Discord now that are starting to see people from Florida join who can't have retics, and now Riley's on there. There's a lot of carpet python chatter, and some people are just like, enough is enough. Like, please, let's talk about retics.
I get. And I try to keep it to like, once in a while I'll throw a little, hey, did somebody say Morelia jab in there?
Exactly.
You know? and then I just let it die down. I don't want to be that squeaky wheel that gets the bad grease, you know?
Right.
Until I get my tree monitors.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like I've been loud about my chondros, about my carpets. It's, I don't know. I'm gonna.
Well, that's the thing. Nobody can stay in one lane, and I think that's the best part of this hobby. You can't just have one thing. Like, even the most diehard retic people, I guarantee you go to their house, they got like a pet, something or other at home or whatever.
They got one, right? It might not be public, but they got something.
Of course, everybody does.
I mean, shit, you're talking about one of the people, we're talking about line breeding and you know, quote unquote inbreeding today, and you want to talk about one of the greatest at line breeding and retics. We talk about Shane, who's on his 9th generation of Sunfires and OGS stuff, and the guy breed balls pythons, dude. Like, so I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, ball pythons are extremely resilient to whatever their gene pool is or isn't confined to. Fortunately, a lot of importation has been able to come in for that species, but you would think with like the doubling down on recessives and certain things that you would see it, but you just don't. That species has to have, without any formal education on like genomics or anything like that, that species has to have one of the most diverse, you know, array of DNA sequence and just like everything on there to throw out that much versatility and mutations without any deleterious effects for the most part. Like, it's impressive. And, you know, I think that's kind of like the little gateway into what we're going to talk about tonight.
Right. Again, just a validation that we picked the right person to come on because he used the word deleterious. And I was like, all right, yeah, we're good. We're good.
I love that word. It's not one I use much because I like to keep it fresh, you know. Don't want to wear it out.
Yeah. I feel like by no means is this going to be, you know, I don't think Nathan and I didn't ask Riley to come up with scientific papers. None of this is going to be empirically researched and studied. And I think that's the main concern and issue with a lot of topics like this in herpetoculture is that just we don't have a way to hone in on, or just no one really has. So we are having a discussion, just as a forewarning there for anyone who thinks that we are making black and white claims that are 100% fact. We're not doing that by any means. We're just having a discussion on why in the retic community is it the devil to line breed. So Nathan, do you want to start us off with any questions off the top of your head that you have for Riley?
So at what point do you think health issues become a concern, seeing as reptiles are so hardy in, let's say, if you just straight line breed something generation after generation?
I would think if you start having reproducible ill effects or reproducible complications that aren't just one-offs that seem to happen with the same consistent sequence of events or the same pairing, you know, that
can be anything from health issues to it not even being able to successfully cycle and reproduce itself. Sure. You could see it from females not even be able to have a healthy clutch to the point where going through that cycling can almost kill them. And that itself, you know, might be an expression of a bad DNA sort of like segment in their coding. But, you know, it could be as simple as this one line, it produces fine,
but all of the babies end up dying and developing of tumors, which has happened in certain lines of chondros, or there was a vivid line, I believe it was, of carpets or something. I might be mistaking that name. I'd have to double check with Eric, but it completely died off because everything just cancer, everything.
It was 100% of genetically.
Yeah, and it was just a predisposition for that genetic like line of animals. Now,
and you see it in everything. I mean, from our chondros to your golden retriever.
Sure. Yeah, and it's not because like you did something wrong. It was always going to happen, right? It was always set in the DNA sequencing that was not going to work out. You see, so for example, line breeding, it's an interchangeable term. You can say line breeding, you could say inbreeding, you could say selective breeding. They all kind of have the same implication. You're taking a look or a desired outcome, and you're taking animals within a certain gene pool and aiming for the homogeneity of those desired genes. And so we see that visually when we're talking about recessive genes. So for example, in carpet pythons, when the granite gene in Papuan carpets came out, it's a recessive mutation. So everybody knows
Shout
that.
Out to Harrisoni.
Yep, which is now actually
it got reclassified again.
Well, according to the new publication, they've found that there is no DNA differentiation or like genetic variation between like Cape Yorks, Darwins, and Papuans. So it's in the publication that everyone's able to review and disclose and debate how they see fit. But that is the more complete carpet python's view on it. But regardless of how you look at it, a recessive mutation, the granite mutation, popped up in it. Beautiful, amazing. But in order to prove these new mutations out when they first come out, you got to figure out how they're inherited, where they come from. So you have to do some test breeding. You get something out of a pairing, you got to do that pairing again, see if it happens again. Then as you're raising up those abnormalities, you want to figure out what the plan is. You're either breeding them back to mom or dad or to siblings to see if you can reproduce that, if you get different results in a significant way. And all of these clues can tell you, okay, it's a incomplete dominant mutation, it's a recessive mutation, it's a polygenic based on the results, and you do it a few times and it's reproducible. Your evidence is all right there in the offspring. And so that's how we get the answers. But then the problem is when you want to be the first to do it or be the only one to do it and produce it in mass, you're going to take the shortcuts. And so you're going to do the quickest results to get you those recessive mutations. So you're going to produce as much homogeneity as possible, regardless of the relatedness. And if you keep going, there's a good chance, because of the genetics involved, you might run into deleterious effects. And that ended up being the case with the granite. It was so inbred that you got, animals that would hatch out without half the skull or one eyeball out the front, or they'd corkscrew all crazy, or all sorts of, you'd run the gamut. Yeah, Cyclops.
These are examples within genetic mutations.
Correct.
That and there's no set timeline. It seems like in when or if. It's just if there's a bad mutation over time, it's probably going to present itself if you keep line breeding.
Yeah. If you keep going for the homozygosity of the expression, if you're just doubling down on that without any like outcrossing of anything,
like making new heads, right?
Yeah. If you don't do any of that,
kind of worst case scenario. Yeah.
I mean, exactly. I think that's a great scenario of what happens when you just you don't bother to outcross to make the heads from somewhere else to get them again, and you just keep going homozygous over and over and over again, which by the way is the quickest way to kill an investment.
Flood the market with all visuals.
Yeah, that's how you get a $12,000 animal to be, $450 in 8 years.
And you see it in everything. I mean, palmetto corn snakes, they show it with bug eyes. Same with like leucistic Texas rat snakes. They show it with bug eyes. I mean, it might not manifest in such horrifying, freaks of nature in the eggs or things that don't hatch out or have horrible deformities, but it certainly shows itself in many ways across species. So, but some seem to be more resilient than others, and pythons and boas, outside of certain like specific like morph genes, tend to demonstrate a lot of resiliency.
So, and that's kind of so again, this is kind of like a selfish venture here, right? Like we talked a little bit about this on a personal basis and
yeah,
like, hey, let's do an episode about this. But let me give you some background on where I'm coming from with this. So as a locality retic breeder, right? We have a very limited gene pool on different localities. For Halmaheras, only 1.1 wild caught animals that all the babies that are being produced come from. The Mindanao, Philippines that I produce, the F2s, all come from the same 1.1, wild caught animals. Madu, or Madu type, whatever you want to refer to, but Madus, they are same thing. Karampas, same thing. We can maybe outcross half a generation. Even with Salayers right now in the country, there's the Retic Ranch line, and then you have the Pets of Plenty line, and then there was another wild. But I mean, you're limited to like only 4 unrelated different animals, right? So at some point, like crossing those related animals is going to happen. And so I have people reaching out to me. Hey, what are the parents? What are this? What are that? And I try to explain to them like, hey, limited gene pool. And a lot of people are just turned off by the fact that you are like, you took siblings, or you took, animals related to each other, and you took them back to each other. And it's like, well, the only other option is we just let all the F1s die, and we don't make any F2s. And now there are no more of this locality in the country. But then also when I was getting into it, it seemed like there was a very big like, oh, I have this and I have that's unrelated, same locality, and they're more valuable because I can crossbreed them, and they're going to be genetically healthier. And I'm starting to, I now have a skeptic mindset, and I'm now starting to think that how much of this is marketing to increase the value of animals, and how much of this is legit. Because I know in horses, for example, many breeders will line breed for the intention of identifying illness, right? So again, if you are taking animals related to each other and there's a predisposition for heart failure, or for enlarged hearts, or for cancer, when you line breed, you're going to get to that result quicker. And therefore, you're able to establish that this pedigree and this line is susceptible to these issues. So they almost do it intentionally. They're like, hey, let's try to like really just exacerbate all the medical conditions that we can out of a line. And if it doesn't have any after several generations, then you're looking at spending $2 million on a horse.
We also want to thank VivTech Products for being an affiliate sponsor of the Retic Lounge. Stop by VivTech Products for the best UV spectrum lighting on the market that will enhance and improve your snake's overall well-being and health. Visit vivtechproducts.com and use the code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off. Again, visit vivtechproducts.com and use our affiliate code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off. Looking for the perfect accessories for your hatchlings or juvenile retics? Look no further than Heli Guy Serpents. Our sponsor, Chris Sexton, is coming in hot with an amazing 3D printer, creating top-notch perches and other caging accessories for your beloved pets. Enrich your retics environment with their high-quality products. Use our promo code TRL10 for a 10% discount on your purchase. Visit them today at heliguyserpents.com and start giving your pets the best. Heli Guy Serpents, the premier source for 3D printed caging accessories. Again, that's www.heliguyserpents.com and use our promo code TRL10 for 10% off all of your 3D printed accessories today.
I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that based off of like the information that's out there on the other species that you know of, that you work with? Like, when let's Nathan had his 10 minutes of morph talk. Let me get like 10 minutes of just talking about like localities for a second, and like what, because I also don't want to do anything neglectful either, right? Like, I don't want to do anything messed up.
Yeah, of course. I think everybody involved in this conversation has the animal's well-being at the center of their curiosity or intentions. So I don't think anybody in this conversation is looking to create, cancer, snakes or something intentionally.
But if you could create thriving single-eyeballed snakes, that'd be cool.
That would actually be, or like two-headed snakes.
Dude,
like
two-headed
two-headed
would be the money maker.
Dude, that'd be game over.
As long as they live 20 years and they don't fight over the food and kill each other, then you're good.
Yeah, I would absolutely do that in a heartbeat. Yeah, so in my experience and from everything that I've read and other people that I've spoken to and worked with, and just kind of over the years kind of being involved in all of this, the only thing that I've ever come across that was really like showed any potential signs of like deleterious effects of like reptile inbreeding, other than like some of the like bug eyes and weird things like that, was like crebos and a lot of the dry marcon. They seem to have a sensitivity to certain inbreeding symptoms. Now, I'm not that plugged into that community, but I do have like a little bit of a taste of what's going on. I know that they suspect that a lot of some of the split ventral scales that seem to be unnatural seems to tie in with some of the inbreeding, and there's been several different lines of axanthic black-tail crebos that have popped up, and so outcrossing with those has proven to be valuable to those involved in that project for just how sensitive the species seems to be to it. But outside of like, a handful of one-offs like that, reptiles and amphibians in general seem to be highly resilient to a lot of what we would call inbreeding. And excuse me.
I think the Borrelia community is a great example. I mean, when's the last time we've been able to get fresh imports of Australian species into the country? What was it, early 2000s? Or was it even, when was the last time because I know that
it was pre-Lacey.
Yeah, it was definitely pre-Lacey.
Yeah.
Australia was the one who slapped the hammer on that. That wasn't us.
Right. As far as legal goes, yeah, it's been decades since any legal carpet pythons other than Papuans off of, Papua New Guinea have come in. Now, I will say some MIA line jungles, and they're named that. It's a long story, but basically they were confiscated, smuggled, and then legally released.
Is it literally MIA line because of like Miami?
Yeah, Miami Airport. Yeah, there's a great story to it.
That's awesome.
For another time, but yeah, I have a pair of them.
If you want to get a sense of it, go read Stolen World.
I have it. I have it on my dining room table. I just opened it up yesterday. I got like 20 pages in.
I highly recommend that everybody in the reptile hobby read Stolen World. Read it with a grain of salt. Every author has at least the tiniest little bias, but I think that was the least biased one. Lizard King is fantastic. Has a bit of bias in it too, but also a fantastic read. Like, if you ever want to get perspective on like how the hobby formed and where we've all come from, those are two foundational books. But yeah, I mean, in the carpet community, we don't use the term inbreeding. It's not used. It's not a concern. It's not. I couldn't even tell you. Like, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with anybody other than somebody new, curious about exactly what we're talking about, because this is exactly how you find variations within looks, or how you refine a certain look. And this is why you'll hear certain longtime carpet python breeders say that, they don't, jungles are just all black and yellow banded, and they're all screaming crazy yellow and rich blacks because they've just been, over the decade and a half or so previously, that was what everyone went for, and they've just done it, and it's just been done, beaten to death. But you don't really see any lines of them that have issues. You don't hear any abomination clutches or like things that popped up later in the offspring. I mean, it's just like, it doesn't matter who did it or where it come from. They're just amazing. They're just really fantastic animals, and you'll almost never run into that. The only time you ever run into issues is when there's like an actual like morph or something involved, mutation. And then you really double down.
It's called a mutation, right?
Yeah,
like
it's broken genetics. It's literally a broken part of that DNA sequence that should not.
It's already
exist.
Defected. It's defective.
Defective is the perfect like Webster's definition for that.
It's a defective animal of what the representation of the animal is, and when you exacerbate it over and over again, you're eventually going to get issues. Just like with tiger reticulated pythons, with the corked, like the bent tongue, and then you take.
I haven't seen any bent tongues with any of my tigers I've produced, but I do notice a behavioral difference.
Dude, my tigers are all assholes, at least, but
even the one I sent you.
No, I mean, she that's true. She's a freaking sweetheart. My entire clutch of tigers that I produced, that was, majority tigers, I opened up the tub, and I think maybe it was a neurological switch. You open up the tub and it automatically opens up their mouth. I don't know, but they would just open up their mouth.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah. And I think that's
also I want to say the X-Men wouldn't call it like a disadvantage.
Exactly.
They'd call it a gift.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a gift.
So I would venture to say that so at least in Morelia, because you look at Morelia and you're talking about like there are jungles that are just like there are different lines of jungles, and you probably cannot find a jungle carpet in captivity that looks like how it's supposed to in the wild anymore.
Yeah, it's hard to do.
It's because
most people don't want those ones.
No, they don't. But I guess my point is they've enhanced and they've line bred to the point where they're. I mean, they're perfect. If anybody can make a better version of a jungle at this point, I challenge you. But and you don't hear of issues, and you don't hear people complaining about it. I guess where I'm coming from is the sense of like, there are people that like reach out to me and they're like, man, I have this passion for localities, and I want to get some of your Mindanao, or I want to get Halmaheras. And they're like, and then they learn that there's no unrelated animals. And then they're just like, all like, oh, so there's no point with localities. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like,
it's a big jump to get there. That's a big jump to go from there's only two, so there's no point. That means that translation of information as to what that means, they're basing it off of, either human constructs or mammalian or something extra. Because like it's not wrong. Like obviously humans inbreeding, you'll see horrible effects in 2 generations. Horrible effects. Like freak shows, circus, like y'all need to be registered. Virginia. Yeah, exactly. And that's a whole nother. We won't even go there.
It's everyone. Well, I mean, those who know, and it's not like not common knowledge. I'm not outing anyone
specifically. It's just a whole community.
It's a family. It's one family from West Virginia, and one barks like a dog. Just let them be.
Yeah. So, and Riley, I think the reason why people get there, it goes back to the whole marketing thing, because when you talk about like the locality standpoint in retics, there's this idea that I absolutely cannot, I can't take related animals to each other for more than 2 generations, or else I have an abomination. But then you have people in the morph world that like, man, everyone like most people's dream morph is like an ocelot. Do you know
all I'm
do you know
gonna
how
say right
line-
now, all I'm gonna say right now is snarfles.
So yeah, I mean
Done. That's all I gotta say. That's
right?
all I gotta say.
I think I have a sticker of him back somewhere.
Dude, those stickers were awesome.
If
Dude's an abomination, but
if people can get behind snarfles and say
Yeah.
that that's ethically okay that he's breeding,
but hold on,
the argument about against localities just goes out the window. As far as I'm concerned.
And I mean, and again, it goes back to the ocelot. Everybody wants one. They're all freaking line bred. The ocelots we have here in this country don't look anything like the original one out in the wild, and it's because they've been line bred and they look different.
I think the better example is albino. I mean,
Thank you.
that through the history of retics, I mean, or
Stood the test
look
of
at it in
Reties
berms
or whatever.
Yeah.
Ball pythons.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And you know what? And I think that so I came out, I've said it on the Patreon and I've started saying it on my social media that the 2 wild caught animals that I have, a couple people started calling them lab line Calatoa. I understand it's just from a wild caught pair. It's not even close to being established a line. It's stuck. It's what I call them. But I do plan to line breed them because they came out with exceptionally yellow animals, and you don't see a lot of vibrant yellow in Calatoas. You see a lot more of the brown hues, and I'm going to continue to line breed those animals. And I have people telling me that's a horrible idea. And I'm like, why? Give me give me anecdotal evidence to support that this is tell me one locality that you know of in retics that has been line bred that ended up being a shit show, because you can't. And again, I think it comes back to just being an ethical and responsible breeder. Sure, if I'm 3-4 generations in and I start to see enlarged hearts everywhere, or I start to see kink tails, or, my survival rate of these animals is 50%, at that point, I'll be more than happy to publicly share the information.
Sure.
But I don't know. It's just, it's a stretch, but Riley, I'm sure there are more than just carpet pythons that have been, line bred as well without any issues, but
yeah. Without going into specifically aiming for a look at rough scale pythons, their entire existence hinges off of 5 animals.
Yeah.
No issues.
And they all came in they all came in at the same
they all came in the same field collecting time, exact, they're probably related from the same group out in the wild, at least to some degree. And then literally everything in the Australian hobby and everything that's made it to the United States and Europe and everywhere else hinges off of those
water
handful
pythons.
Dude, it's all the same. Literally everything Australian or Indonesian, chances are it came from a couple founding animals, unless it's still currently being imported and exported en masse, which even if it is, how many people are establishing those animals, breeding them and blending them into the existing lines? Probably less than 10%. Yeah, man, absolutely. And if you talk to Vin Russo, and we'll even step outside of Morelia and pythons in general, look at boas, the entire group of every boa that is an island race off of the northeastern coast of South America, or even Occidentalis, all these insular and island boas, they're all extremely resistant.
Look at Guerrero with his Max Pink line of Occidentalis.
I have some of them at the shop. They're fantastic. They're amazing. Yeah, dude, you can go generations deep and see nothing. You talk to Derek Roddy. He's one of the few people that purveys this Atherton line of carpet pythons, which, whether you call them a Cape York or a coastal, or I don't even know at this point, that's above my pay grade, but he alleges he's 12 generations in, you know what I mean? And I don't doubt him. He's been working with this same founding stock of animals for decades, and he doesn't have any issues. And I've seen some of his offspring end up in other people's and some of my friends' collections, and they're perfect. They're perfect. So, I mean, I think I think it's okay to be mindful of like, hey, if we see issues, we should be aware of it and report it and see if we can tease it out as to the source. If it is a one-off or a genetically related thing or a morph related thing, like, prove that out, do the due diligence. But like, I think to say that for an entire group of reticulatus, like that entire group, you just can't do it. I think that has probably a much lower likelihood of being accurate than anything else. That just seems like too broad of a brush to just say. It just doesn't seem to fit what we know pythons and boas are resilient towards.
Yeah, and I kind of want to shift. We're talking pretty broad on the whole subject, but
yeah,
I think we should talk about some of the examples that we have seen in reptiles of like, this doesn't work. This is a fatal combo, or this presents disease in some form, or this won't reproduce. Like,
absolutely.
Look at Carpondros.
Yeah, there seems to be a little bit of sterility in Carpondros at a certain point, whether it's 1 or 2 generations in. It's up for debate. I don't have a dog in that race, but I read about it plenty. You mentioned with the albino stuff, there was a lot of issues with that. Shoot, there's a ton, especially when you get into the morphs. But yeah, it can go across species.
I mean, in retics, you talk about golden childs, right? And then you make, you take a golden child to golden child, super golden child, mostly fatal. We do see some issues with super motleys.
Yep. Same within boas, motley boas.
Jags in retics, spiders,
and carpets.
Pythons.
The jaguar gene and in retics and carpets and the spider gene and ball pythons is all exactly the same. If you were to
the same, like on the DNA
everything
strand.
Everything is exactly the same. Like if you were to breed a spider ball python to a carpet, you would get the same results as if you bred a jag to a normal, or if you bred a spider to a jag, you're going to get 25% leucistic dead fatal babies in there. Like that shit doesn't work. They don't develop functioning lungs. It's tied to the gene, and it seems to express itself across multiple species. You see it in the zebra gene in carpets and batiks in blood pythons
for retics, the super
exactly
childs. There's a handful of things that we know. Okay, we don't breed this.
Right. I mean, and that all starts from trial and error, right? And so again, it goes back to this double standard that you see, at least in the retic world, of like, let's not do this with localities, even though we're not talking about morphs, but like, hey, it's free game in the morph world, and people aren't gonna, again, probably the most beautiful albino animal in the majority of people is a purple albino retic. It's
You're
a
right.
stunningly
albino retic right behind me. That's
exactly.
Most beautiful one.
I mean, she's you could tell that's like a daughter to you. But
not your poo-poo albino, right?
She produced it.
Yeah,
she produced.
special.
Yeah, she produced the poople. But you ask majority of people what's the most beautiful form of albino out there. Many are going to say the purple albino. There's a reason why ball python breeders are trying their damnedest to make a purple albino that stays purple.
And they don't even use the real albino, the straight teen-egg albinos. Nobody even plays with that in ball pythons anymore.
And so, but they are probably easy. Like, if anyone is going to buy a retic at a show, and it's their first retic or whatever, the purple albino is the easiest sell, man. It is so beautiful.
My first retic. I got hooked with a lavender, right? Led to Eric Lee with the purple, and that was all I wanted. I didn't care about anything else but purple at that point.
Exactly, and there's not a single purple albino retic that isn't heavily. Like, I mean, we're talking about just like,
no, you can trace that super dwarf animal that's been crossed down so many times to be able to get that size to the original import from Anson Wong and
the
Bob
lavender.
Clark. Yeah,
exactly. Yep. And so like, I don't know. I just again, and that's where like the skeptic and the cynicist in me in the retake world starts to think like, are we pushing this agenda that is just is it a let me value and market my animals as more valuable because I bred them from unrelated animals of the same locality when in my opinion, I don't know, but you tell me, Riley, in other industries, and I guess we'll talk about carpets because that's just your bread and butter. But like when you're talking about a line bred jungle, like the different line breds that are out there, the different lines of these animals, aren't they worth more?
Yes.
Right.
Hands
because
down.
right. And so it's like, and I would almost venture to say that a line bred animal for a specific trait done very well and enhanced increases value, but everybody in the locality game of retakes runs away.
So for example, in jungle carpets, they're an easy target. Let's say you're like me and you want value in your animal and you want a fair bit of background to justify that value. You want at least to know, well, let's just say 2-3 generations back of what the parents were to verify that it's not some sort of, coastal jag cross or something that just slipped through the cracks, because they are highly variable and you can't tell what you're looking at just by looking, right? You got to know. I personally came up in the Morelia world placing higher value on the more lineage behind an animal, the better, as opposed to, well, it's beautiful as hell, but I don't know what it is. Like these two parents are undocumented animals that the person picked up at a show somewhere. They looked great. Have no idea what they were. They put them together and made phenomenal animals. I've always placed more on the information behind it. The curious part within Morelia is that despite me being a representative of some of the people in that hobby, you look at the phenomenon of like highlighter jungles, there is no confirmed background to that, yet they are like a name that people will literally slap on to try and add more value, or like because it's known to be beautiful, bright yellow, gorgeous, screaming highlighter stuff. That was like
which
it's a
didn't
line.
happen by luck.
No, but it's got some undocumented animals in its history. If you have a verifiable an actual highlighter line animal, but they still fetch the same prices, if not more, than jungles with actual documentation. And so they're sort of that anomaly that, kind of reminds me that a beautiful snake is still a beautiful snake. And that there's like some diversity in what the hobby wants as far as, our demographics. But yeah, man, I think there's a lot of overlooked value in this line breeding stuff, because you can start looking at it like a racehorse. You can start looking at a pedigree. You can start looking back and understanding where these came from. And I'm not saying that those things like highlighters aren't valuable. I have highlighter German animals. I have crazy stuff in here that I can only go back like 2 generations. So like, I don't know what it is essentially, but it's stunning. So,
well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you get just like more consistent, like reliable results out of what you're doing.
Right.
100%. 100%.
And it only gets better.
Absolutely. So say you're getting into, again, we'll start with jungle. So you're getting into jungles. You're going to pick the nicest male and the nicest female you can find. You're going to breed them. You're going to keep the best pair back, right? It's just standard procedure. You keep the nicest pair back. It's just common sense. As those raise up, you might breed that pair again a few times, but your ultimate goal is to either put that male back to mom or breed that pair together again. Because what you're essentially doing from a conceptual... I may be
doing that this year.
Yeah. So what you're doing is by holding back the best pair from those animals, you're essentially gambling on those animals having the most desirable and grouped amount of the genes that make up their visual look. And you're betting on that if you double down on that by then breeding them together, you're going to increase those desirable traits even exponentially, because you're just increasing the odds of homogeneity of the roll of the dice that is breeding, because every embryo that comes out, it's literally a shakeup of what the DNA possibilities are and all the odds, and you can't predict any of it, but you can kind of know mathematically, like if you're looking at morphs. But if you think about every single feature of that animal as some sort of a coding like that, when you take the best of the best and you breed them together, you're essentially saying, I've got the best of the best and I want the best of the best of the best. And so that's where line breeding comes in, and that's where you're really selecting for certain looks and things. And so that's the scary part to some people, is they're like, well, that's brother to sister, and then brother to sister of brother to sister and brother to sister. Reptiles, there is no social construct. They don't operate that way. They have finite ranges. Males and females vary differently. And if you're on an island, it's even less. And if you have a certain phenotype that only lends itself.
Superdwarf island.
Absolutely. I mean, think of a tiny little island where the perimeter, the fringes lead you no shelter. All right. So you're taking 10 to 15% off of your overall usable territory, and that's just gone. It's not useful. So you're down to 80% of useful territory. And within that, maybe 20% of that provides shelter, 20% of it provides thermoregulatory properties, and then the rest is like open for scavenging. So your best bet is to like hide, do as little as possible until the opportune moment for food comes around. And so going back to Vin Russo's approach to breeding some of these island boas that stay very small, they only experience an influx of bird prey during this like 6 to 12 week window of the year. That's the only time they have to feed, and then they get nothing. And so that's what right. And so that's what they do. They gorge heavily, they eat a ton, but they're small. And so those resources go a long way to keep them over those longer periods of time. And you also kind of, on a different side note, see a lot of parthenogenesis in some of those island species just as a survival mechanism. But it's no different than retics, man. It's exactly the same mechanisms to survive, except I would imagine the retics probably have a more favorable climate and food availability year round, so they don't necessarily have to limit themselves on size and anything. So it's just, I just think the plasticity of their phenotype and genotype is just, it's on the same parallels as carpet pythons. And to think that essentially in the evolutionary trajectory of the Australo-Indonesian evolution of pythons, they stopped and found their spot there. The Australian stuff kept going and they found their spot there, but essentially they're not much different. They have the same build. They have a prehensile tail, smart brain, 6 rows of recurved teeth, built to essentially handle any environment, whether it's swimming, arboreal, terrestrial. Like they can kind of conquer it all. Why do we attribute this like really highly sensitive, theoretical, deleterious like inbreeding behavior to these ones and not these ones, when we've seen that these ones do just fine, decades and decades into line breeding or inbreeding, but we don't have anything to show for these alleged deleterious effects in these other. To me, retics and carpets are so closely related. So to say that like you can't do something that these can is kind of a stretch.
And the frustrating thing to me is when people have a specific line of I'll give a good example, like the Doc Murdoch line Coyote, practically extinct now, right? They were crossed to another line of Coyote, right? Instead of being kind of like bred back together first to create more Doc Murdochs first, you know, I think that when we get away from line breeding, we also strip away the opportunity for buyers to produce unrelated animals themselves, right? Like if there's only 2 unrelated or 3 unrelated lines of animals, and we say we're never going to line breed, we're only going to crossbreed. When you are selling the results of that crossbred animal, the now consumer only has the option to buy the crossbred animal, and they can no longer make their own crossbred animals. They can only make a line bred or a 50% related or a 25% related, right? And so
Right.
I even think the idea of breeders working heavily with localities need to be doing some line breeding at some point. And again,
You're going to have to.
So line breeding to me, you know, you talked about line breeding, inbreeding, selective breeding, all essentially the same thing. I think that there is some difference, right? So line breeding and selective breeding are kind of the same thing, right? Where you're selecting a trait and enhancing it.
Right.
Inbreeding is in my opinion, right? Again, this isn't like a fact, but inbreeding is more of the well, I have this and I have that, let's breed it together. Without a goal, without an end goal in mind. And you know, and even at inbreeding, again, it sometimes is going to have to be necessary to keep and conserve the localities of specific animals. And I'm not talking about just retics, but any animal that we can't import anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. You can draw so many parallels to the status of retics in the United States hobby to carpets, to pretty much everything out of Australia, snakes, geckos, turtles, you name it. Even, you know, a lot of the stuff out of Madagascar, with their fickle nature of being able to legally allow an export and import. I mean, you see it across the board. But you don't hear a lot of negative talk about inbreeding, and I've dug around a lot, and you just don't see it. Whether, you know, it's just going unreported or not, I think you see more instances of people talking about line breeding without realizing that what they're talking about in the bigger picture is that it isn't an issue. And so you see things. Now, granted, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. Is everybody actually, is that an actual line? Like, did they actually make a line, or what is that? There's so many variables involved, but
right. Like, I don't have a line, despite people calling my, you know, Calto's lab line Calto. I took bloodline that didn't exist in the country because they didn't make offsprings. I put them together and created animals that were now unrelated to anything else in that locality. But that doesn't mean that I have a line, so to say, yet.
Well, so those are your founders. Those are your founders. If you reproduce that again, you do that again, and then they produce something. Yeah, you do have a line.
Then we can, right? But this is I guess we're on like baby steps, right? Like it's technically not a line yet until I can do that.
Yeah, as far as where my mind goes conceptually with what the definition of a line is, it's something unique that somebody else hasn't produced from a combination of animals. Whether those are part of other lines or not is up for debate, but generally you want new blood. And a new combination that hasn't been put together, and then you're going to purvey that, and you're going to be the one who's going to reproduce that multiple times, get several generations in, and then you have something to show for it that is reproducible, has its own look. So I could go through my high color line, my dark line of Papuan carpets, and a few others, and I could show you that these are like what I'm starting to build on, but in no way, shape, or form do I consider them my line or something unique yet, because what they need to do is take the next steps into one, reproducing themselves, showing a significance in that, and then mixing new blood with it all. Like, that's, to me, if somebody else can do it and just go get 2 animals and have the same results, it's, your line isn't unique, right? It's got to be something that stands on its own, that like people can't just go buy 1 and 2 and make 3.
Right.
And you've put some work in and you're a couple generations in. And I'm sure there's some, I feel like there's probably some gray area depending on species and what's available there, because like, say you've only got 2 animals of a representative species in the country.
Well, I'll say that at least locality wise in retics, oftentimes you see these lines that again are not line bred, right? They're not selectively bred for a specific trait to look different, but oftentimes what we see is there's the right lab line Calatoas, right? Just to establish that I bred Calatoas together that was new bloodline, and so any of those offsprings people call lab line. And then there's the Reach Dream lines that Garrett works with. Now that name is specifically, for a kind of like a foundation that they did for Forrest Fanning's kid, right? But again, those animals bred together in Garrett's possession, I think, have only happened once, right? So again, not a line.
That's unique.
Right? But it's unique though, right? Because
we don't call the bottleneck Tom Belongan breedings a line of anything.
Right, exactly. Because and everyone's like, well, I don't want to work with Tambelongans because they came in F2s and it's like, so what if they came F2s, right? But
So what's the story? So what's the story on the Tom Belongans as far as the United States hobby goes? Because that piques my interest. People don't want to mess with something that's F2.
I'm gonna grab my well, again, people don't want to mess with something F2 that's inbred in locality purposes. Now, Nathan, do you know the history of the import while I go grab my light that I just kicked off?
Not the history of the import. No, that's a Lucas Retic Nation deep dive for sure. But no, I just know that the bottlenecking of that locality has made it kind of undesirable.
And so hear me out. And again, like Nathan's saying,
I've seen some in person. They're some of my favorite retics,
dude.
Without a doubt,
I for me personally, I would pay more for an F2 versus something like Wildcaught or one. I would literally probably pay double.
Right, exactly. And that's what will chill out with double in the retic locality world. That's a lot of money.
I'm just trying to help you out, Lucas, man. I know you're the retic guy.
He doesn't have Tom Belongans yet.
Yeah. So we Philo Reptiles in Germany had the import Tambelongans. They had the Wildcaughts. They bred F1s. They sent the F1s over to our country. Sawfish Reptiles produce F2s. Those F2s were dispersed to some people. Garrett got the collection of the Tambelongans from Sawfish. But now people are like, well, I don't want to get a pair because they all come from the same animal. And I'm over here like, I would love a pair.
More for me.
but that's the thing is they've been pretty difficult to reproduce, and which to me again makes them more desirable for me.
So what I would love to know what that breaks down to. What does that mean they're more difficult to reproduce? Why? What is going on in that? Because ball pythons used to be difficult to be able to reproduce. So
and that's the thing that a lot of people like about locality retics that we can speculate, right? There's a lot of speculation on why.
Yellowhead Bali.
Right. I mean, a lot of people struggled with that at first, but No to How had that shit on lockdown. Like didn't have an issue. I'm just supporting a little bit of Riley's
exactly question of are they really that difficult, or is it just something we're missing?
Right. And Solayers used to be like just everywhere. So many clutches of them, and then for some reason they all dropped off the face of the earth. Probably died from neglect somewhere. And all of a sudden in the last 5-6 years, you don't see a lot of them. And when I got the pair, I had probably close to a dozen breeders say, those are really hard to breed. And I was like, awesome, can't wait. And so I started coming into the Soleils with a different mindset, and I dropped my ambient temperatures the year that I bred them. My average ambient temperature was 82 instead of 83.5 or 84. And I dropped my temperatures much cooler on the cycle side, and literally my first trial Soleils, I bred them. And so I don't know if that's the issue with the Tambalongans. I know that I do know that, Reach Out Reptiles hasn't produced them. I don't know to what degree or extent that they have, but knowing just Garrett and his passion for locality retics, there's no way he hasn't tried.
Well, he's not giving up.
Well,
no, he's not. He's gonna.
Where the babies that Tristan came from? Didn't he?
Sawfish.
Oh, I thought those were produced over at Reach Out.
No, I mean, I don't think Reach Out has sold, and I could be wrong. Garrett, message me if I'm wrong. I'll make a little YouTube shorts if I'm wrong. But I don't think Garrett has. Wait, no, there was 1 year where maybe he produced all seven. I think
he did.
Maybe he did once.
I want to say he did, and that's the clutch that Tristan got his animal from. So that's just why
I can
pausing here.
Tristan will probably answer me too if I reach out to him. But I will say that that it's been hard to reproduce consistently. Now that there's F2s out there and they're younger and growing up, I'm hoping that kind of, their age could be a factor with the original F1s that came into the country, or just
there's so much that goes on with acclimating wild-caught animals, whether it's babies or adults, has a huge difference. I mean, there's the hands they go through. I mean, you could literally ruin, quote unquote, imports just by mishandling them. Just the people who bring them in, not keeping them hydrated before they're exported out, things like that. You could really mess up some of those animals, I would imagine, and stress them out to a point where they won't recover, I would bet.
Yeah, and I mean, they're a good example is I keep my room heated ambient. Some people do a gradient, taking an animal who's bred for 5 seasons in a gradient and moving them to an ambient. You might try for the first 3 years and then say, well, they're not good at breeding anymore, but it just might take them 3-4 years to acclimate to your husbandry.
100%.
That's a big thing with chondros, and why a lot of people say don't buy adult female chondros. Like, the most successful way is, if you have a way of keeping, is to acclimate and grow them in that way of keeping, so they know the cycles of your temperature and your light drops.
Exactly.
And right, that's how to be successful with a little bit more complicated species, is you raise them in your environment so that they know it, versus taking an animal from a different environment and hoping that. Usually what ends up happening, in my observation and even in my experience, the very first year that you get those animals, it's a shock. They'll go through follicular development. You'll get lucky that very first time. And then after that, you can't get them to breed again.
Yeah, that happens a lot. You see that a lot with first-time scrub python keepers. Yeah, a lot of that random Indo stuff, or like ring pythons or water pythons. Yeah, absolutely. And I think about this all the time in terms to my Apodora, and I've got kind of a very small sample size, but it does kind of hit a lot of the different demographics, and I just pay attention to how they receive a lot of the inputs of their daily life. And I've just got to think that everything that's coming over from Indonesia, Papua, anywhere over there that has to make a journey to the United States, like, if you get anything to breed that is wild caught one time, you're lucky as hell. Like, that is absurd. Like, I've brought in, I've seen, and I've brought in, and I own wild caught and across various species, and it is nothing like multiple generations in of captive bred X, Y, or Z. You name it. It is nothing like they hatch with a completely different programming of multiple generations of input and output based on their lineage, and it's just not the same. It is not the same. Establishing a wild caught animal, I'm not even talking about like parasites or any of that. I'm just talking about getting them to trust you, getting them to eat, getting them to behave,
right?
To feel safe, to demonstrate natural behaviors in front of you. I've got an Apodora that, you know, was with an individual, the previous owner, for a while, and was super calm and great. And she still is. She's wonderful. But I didn't touch her for the first like 3 months she was here, because she's like, every bit of her behavior was, I don't know you. I don't know where I'm at. And I need time to figure this out. And I just let her do that. And as she's been able to do that, she's opened up. She's come out more. She's showing me a lot more of this curiosity and these different behaviors. And she's analyzing things. And you can't. And she's a long-term captive. I'm trying to breed another pair, but like I'm not even thinking about putting a male with her for probably a couple of years. You know what I mean? Like it's not even on my radar right now. My priority with her is giving her as much consistency and normalcy as I can provide, to the point where like eventually, you know, I feel like if I do something, it won't throw her off.
Right. I got my wild caught Kalatoa pair as long-term captives. First year I got her, Partho clutch. Second year, successful clutch. Third year, Partho clutch. Like she's just not, you know, and she went way early for me this year, because I had to starve her for her to finally take a year off. Like I had to like literally limit her calories, and instead of going in September like she normally does, she just like took a moderate, medium-sized meal super gingerly. So I just happened to put my Solaire in with her, and I posted that picture this morning of them locking. And
I saw that.
Dude, that's like 5 months before I normally do intros with her. And had I had just gone off of the books, probably she would have thrown another Partho clutch. She still very well could.
She's the unique animal, I will say. She's well, first of all, not to take anything away from you, you've acclimated her very well, clearly.
No, but what I'm saying, attestation to being difficult is I do think that parthenogenesis is a result of the difficulty of breeding them, right? Like
sure, like a female that wants to cycle, sort of thing. Like everything's pushing her to do it,
right? And she's doing it, right? But like whatever I am doing is not facilitating her to utilize the male.
Interesting.
That's my and Superdorf, wild caught Superdorfs are just, they've been notoriously not prolific breeders. They're just not good breeders. You're lucky if you can get 2 or 3 out of their lifetime of good clutches.
That Indonesian stuff just seems to really be good with Partho, man. Even water monitors will Partho. Like, you get plenty of breeding, but the male is just too old to actually get it done, and the female's still cycling. She'll throw 20 eggs, and 4 of them will be good, and 1 will hatch, and it'll be a complete, you know, replica of mom. And she'll do it multiple times, and that's surefire sign of Partho. And I've seen it plenty of times with our black dragons at the shop. But man, that's super curious. It's like the stress of their body going through all these different cues. It's like breed, and whether the male's there or not, they're like, dude, too bad. We're doing this. We're going, doubling down, and they just. It's
a freak of nature thing. I still don't understand it, but I don't think
retics, they just process things differently biologically. They process food differently. Everything goes like hotter, faster, warmer, but like gestation is longer, things like that. Like they burn through food so much faster. They're a very unique construct. You know, snakes are designed to be very efficient in their in everything, right? Every way about them is supposed to be efficient and retain as much as possible, give away as little as possible. But retics, man, they just burn through it, and they process through it, and they're so active and they're so fast. It's like it's not a problem for them.
My wallet feels it. I'm sure Nathan can relate.
it's
Oh,
just
yeah.
they're a whole different animal, man. They're like the Hemi to the, your 4-cylinder little
Right.
Miata.
Just gotta put a little diesel in it.
It's made me want to just mess around with Malayo Python Timorata, like with Timor pythons. Just to see if the Malayo Python species, if they are different, right?
Those are arguably one of the most beautiful animals on the planet. I think the Xanthic actually is a detriment to them. I think the Xanthic Timors look gross. I love that.
You could make the argument for the Anery Superdorf stuff.
Yeah, I don't see it. I think I see it in combos, but I like on its own. I'm like, I'd rather see the normal. You know what I mean? Like I'd rather see it like out in the wild, how it would be. But I think I might upset people with that Anery talk. I've seen plenty of examples why people are like, this isn't real. And then people are like, yes, it is. And I'm like, yeah, I'm glad I'm not in that pond. But yeah, man, something about those Timors that's like that digital camo. It's like a little smaller retic head, but it almost has like some ball python-esque sort of like soft puppy dog features that lures you in, and then you realize they like to squeeze and spread their mess all over you and do that. And my first experience with the Timor python was all that I needed.
Do they piss everywhere?
Yeah, so I was at Psychotic Exotics warehouse with Todd, and he was just introducing me into this world that was still very new to me at this time. It was like 10 years ago. And he's like, yeah, see, like I have these things, but I don't know why. They're a pain in my ass. I can't even. And he picks one up, and it like all of a sudden I see like the tail end like start to swell like a water balloon. And then all of a sudden it's like cocked and loaded. And in like one quick motion, it like bites him, flings urates, bites him again, flings poop, and flops on the floor and just makes this huge mess, and blood and all this stuff is everywhere in a matter of like seconds. And he like scoops up, gets into it, and puts it away. And he's like, see, now I got to mop the floors and clean all this shit up.
I will say I know a lot of people with F1s that are not having that luck.
Yeah.
So I'm hopefully it turns around quickly. But Riley, I wanted to ask you in regards to line breeding, inbreeding, whatever the case may be. I kind of have a wrap up point that I just kind of want to echo that I've probably shared already. But any other thoughts? Any other comments as we wrap up?
So, just from a general standpoint, something that this entire discussion makes me think of, it takes me back to a lesson from when I was an apprentice zookeeper in 2013, something like that, under my first curator. His name is James Travers, and he'll probably never hear this, but one of the things that made a huge impression on me while I worked under him before he went on his journey was you should always ask why. Why is this the way it is? Why is that the way you do it? Why is that the protocol? Why is that the accepted, whatever it is? Why? Always explore and double check if you don't know. Even if it's just to get yourself brushed up on something so that you understand why it works, or if it's because you're curious if there's a better alternative or a better procedure. Always ask why. It's the constant search for understanding. You don't want to just be doing something because that's just what you've always done, or the way you've always done it, without understanding why. So when somebody brings a statement to me like, you can't do this, it's just general blanket, you just can't do this, the first thing that goes off in my head is why. Yeah. Or why not. And if nobody can bring empirical evidence as to why, to me that seems like the most logical road to go down next. If I'm in that realm. I mean, some of the craziest innovations and progressive steps we've taken as a society and life started out with people saying you can't do that, or that's absurd, or that's crazy. To me, that's like pressing the button. That's like telling me to go do it. You might as well have just pulled the ripcord on the toy.
That's mom and dad telling you no.
No, I mean,
Yeah, that's like saying
dude,
don't grab your skateboard and jump off the roof. What do you think I did when I was 12?
right, exactly. And that's what I say. Like, I'm a skeptic at heart. I'm right there with you. And to be honest, I think skeptics are the ones that tend to push the envelope forward.
You're not making an omelet without cracking a few eggs.
Right. Right. That's a good way to put it. But yeah, man, I wanna echo that concept as well, because I go back to I get you know, Nathan highlighted this in a previous episode, and it's my kind of just how I speak passionately about locality retics, and it rubs off on people. And so I do have people that come to me with just like this like burning heart of wanting to work with localities, and I can't tell you at least a couple dozen times, you know, I you know, people just get immediately turned off at the idea of coming to the realization of our limited gene pool with what we have for localities. Like, even the Kalatoa stuff that people think is plentiful is really not even that plentiful when you look at what is and what's not. And I guess like my whole message is like, you if you're going to get into the locality game, you have to know that it is not a matter of if, but when you are eventually going to have to crossbreed animals. But then again, ask what Riley said is, why can't I do this? And who says so? And why do they think that it can't be done without a massive detriment to the animal's health? And I mean, that's one thing that I could be very thankful for the Retic Lounge and starting these species spotlights, and Nathan saying, hey, let's push outside of the envelope of retics, because I started gaining perspective of so many other different reptile communities, seeing that they have been line breeding for decades and decades, and those animals are only worth more money than the ones that haven't been. And again, I just want to share that this is not a money endeavor for me, but it's more of a, I don't need to be scared anymore. Like that to take siblings back or cousins back, or like, it's not something that I'm afraid of, and I don't want people to like be afraid of.
I mean, it takes the fear away from me if like this Annery girl doesn't go. Like, if the purple girl cycles like she always does, like, I'm gonna throw her son back to her.
Right. And it's okay.
And then I know if that's what happens, I know for sure it's a snow pairing, right? Like, so
exactly,
those are the odds I can bet on doing that line breeding.
Yeah. So, you know, I guess last thing to wrap up my message is just like, if you have a passion for localities, don't get scared because there's not a lot of them left. That's, if anything, that's more reason for you to buckle in and to help with continuing to grow what we have. There's not a lot of us. And I understand a lot of people are there's the hype around localities from time to time, but I promise you, most of the people that buy my animals that I've sold out quickly with the Solaire stuff and now this Mindanao stuff, it's returning like it's the same people. Like there's, I mean, Nathan, name a dozen people that you know that are locality retic specialists. Like a dozen, like, and 12 is not a lot when there's probably
like 4.
Right. Thank you. So like it's just something.
Yeah. 4 or 5.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't be discouraged with that. If anything, you know, be more encouraged to keep producing them before they go away forever. Cause if we keep going at this rate of, well, if they're related, we can't breed them, then I don't know. We got like 3 decades left of like solid locality retics, and then they're all gone. So good luck.
Yeah, I say you find out where that boundary is if it exists. Until
Right.
you found the edges of it, you're not done. And then at the very same point, we only live in a very momentary state of time, right? Like for all we know, things could open up. It's a stretch. It's crazy. It's absolutely absurd to think, but crazier things have happened.
That's very true.
I just got to convince Bob to not bring in Aztecs and bring in localities, and we're set.
Well, see so the other thing too is perception is reality, right? Perception is reality. On the outside of the retic world, to me, if you would have told me Calatoas aren't as abundant as they seem to be, I'd have been shocked. And that's because I'm used to seeing that as the most discussed
Commonly
locality
labeled.
yeah, it's like that's, if you were to ask me what's one name a retic that'd be the first one out of my mouth, just because that's the one I've heard the most. But again, perception is reality. I the only retic people I really follow are you guys, Garrett Hartle, a few others, and when it comes to locality stuff, that's just the name I see more often. It doesn't have anything to do with its availability in the hobby. So perception is reality. So I think the more that you do promoting these various localities here and with other folks in your own vein, that'll change. That'll definitely change, because everything is very just, you can influence so much in your smaller niche and circle within the hobby just by being proactive in talking about it. And it's just a matter of time before things catch wind with people and it gains traction. It's just a matter of time.
Right. And I mean, I can think, Garrett Hartle started doing it with the Jampianis complex and the Superdor stuff. And now you have, Weston that's doing the larger localities, and, people like Rodney that are pushing the Maluku region stuff and the Halmaharan, the Ternates. And
sure.
So
I think there's room for all of it.
Right. There's definitely people that are it's getting out there, which is why I think the popularity has increased. I just want to make sure that, when people realize like, oh, well, there's only one wild caught pair, so I'm going to stay away from my favorite locality because there's only a single wild caught pair. And it's like, why would you do that? Like,
I would really love to hear more insight as to why those people think that way. Like, I'd really love to have like a feedback form. Like, why do you think that way? Where does that come from?
We had a previous Patreon member that would have loved to vocally shared that argument. But anyways, Nathan, you got anything else?
No, man. I think I'm pretty set, and just, questioning why we do things until, there's a definite answer that we shouldn't.
Right.
So, no, Riley, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insight. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.
I appreciate you guys. I love it when I get the message, hey, want to record? Like, yeah, man, let's do it. It's really interesting. I would honestly like to think that another version of me in another world, if I hadn't been bitten by the Morelia bug earlier on, I draw so many parallels to retics. Like, man, I could really see myself. Yeah, I could totally see myself like on the opposite side of the coin, having the same obsession that I do with Morelia and everything behind me for retics. And I just draw so many parallels in that. And in a different way, like they have their own different thing. Like you get a lot of size variety and a lot of different like island localities and stuff that you don't have with carpets, but then they have their own thing too. And so I just,
there's so many overlaps.
Yeah, it just overlaps so naturally, and I find myself tuning into it more than a lot of other sectors in the hobby. And I'm just super grateful that I have the ability to learn from both of you guys. I consider you guys like resources, like boots on the ground that I can just draw straight from the horse's mouth if I want to learn something. And yeah, you guys do a fantastic job. I hope everyone else looks to you guys as a resource too.
We're getting there. But no, that
It's the only
means
way
a
to
lot.
go.
Yeah, that means a lot to me.
Yeah, thank you,
especially
Brian.
coming from someone like you that, you know, you're just so well versed in so many different areas of herpetoculture. So all right, we're gonna kick you out. We're gonna do a quick wrap up, and feel free to hang out in the back lobby. But Riley, thanks again.
Cool.
We'll have you on soon, okay?
Appreciate it.
All right, man. Guys, another episode of the Retic Lounge down. We're on our way to 100, and yeah, this is just one that Nathan and I talked about doing maybe, you know, a month and a half ago, and finally just had the time to do it. We're slowly trying to get a lot more Retic people back on. The week before we had Paul Lucas, and we got a couple people in mind that we plan to have on. Also, I don't know if I messaged you, Nathan, about this, but Paul hit me up and said, hey, I talked to Nathan. He's down to come on the show with me together. So the two of them together kind of want to come on the show to talk about like the fill in the gap story of like kind of
Nathan who?
Did I say Nathan?
Yeah.
No, I think I said Nathan, Weston. Paul and Weston. Sorry.
I was so lost. I was like, I didn't talk to Paul after that I can remember. But
yeah, no, Paul messaged me. He's like, hey, Weston's down to come on with me. So having the two of them on together, I think that'd be fun.
Dare I say a Retic roundtable?
Oh,
all right.
dude.
Well, Lucas, I just doubled back from Red Rocks, 18 hours ago. Fantastic show, but I am running on fumes
White.
to say the least. So
White.
everyone, we'll see you next week. Remember, join the Patreon. We have fun discussion over there all the time. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, do all the fun stuff to help on the algorithm for this episode, and we'll see you next week.